The lease addendum sat on our kitchen counter like a loaded weapon, unsigned by me but bearing my wife's careful signature in blue ink. 11 days. That's what Lyra had agreed to without asking. 11 days for her ex-husband Mason Redden and his teenage son Noah to stay in our cramped one-bedroom apartment. The same apartment where our 8-month-old daughter Emma slept in a crib wedged between our bed and the wall. I stared at the document while Emma's cries echoed from the bedroom. The baby had been fussy all week, probably sensing the tension that had been building between Lyra and me like storm clouds. My wife stood at the stove, her lawyer's posture rigid even while scrambling eggs, pretending this was all perfectly normal. "You can't be serious about this," I said, holding up the paper. The morning light streaming through our single window made the ink look almost accusatory. Lyra didn't turn around. Her dark hair was pulled back in the severe bun she wore to court, though she wouldn't be going to the law firm today. Saturday mornings were supposed to be ours. Family time, she always said. Apparently, that definition had expanded. "It's temporary, Colby. Noah needs stability right now. The school district thing fell through and Mason's between places." Her voice carried that measured tone she used when cross-examining witnesses. Clinical, detached. "It's the right thing to do." The right thing. I almost laughed. In our 600-square-foot apartment, with a baby who barely slept through the night, we were supposed to house her ex-husband and his 15-year-old son. The same Mason Redden who'd cheated on Lyra 3 years ago, leading to their messy divorce. The same man who still owed her $12,000 in settlement money. "Where exactly are they supposed to sleep?" I asked, gesturing around our tiny living space. The couch was barely long enough for me when I'd been banished there during Emma's particularly rough nights. "And why didn't you think to discuss this with me first?" Now she turned, her green eyes flashing with that familiar mixture of righteousness and irritation. "Because I knew you'd react like this. It's 11 days, not 11 months. Noah's a good kid going through a rough time. His father made mistakes, but that doesn't mean we abandon them." Emma's cries intensified from the bedroom. I could hear her little fists beating against the crib rails, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my life since she was born. Between my job doing tech support for the city's emergency services and the sleepless nights, I felt like I was drowning. Adding 2 more people to this pressure cooker seemed like madness. "They're not our responsibility," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could see Lyra's expression hardening. This wasn't a discussion. This was her informing me of a decision she'd already made. "They'll be here tomorrow evening," she said, turning back to the eggs. "Mason's picking up Noah from his grandmother's place, then coming straight here. I already cleared it with the landlord." That stopped me cold. "You cleared it with Henderson? When?" "Yesterday. I called him from the office." She scraped eggs onto 2 plates with more force than necessary. "He said short-term guests are fine as long as we submit the proper documentation." I looked at the addendum again, noting Henderson's signature alongside Lyra's. This hadn't been some impulsive decision. She'd planned this, executed it with the same methodical precision she brought to her legal cases. The only person left out of the planning was me, her husband, the father of her child, the man whose name was also on the lease. Emma's crying reached a crescendo, and I headed toward the bedroom. Our daughter stood in her crib, tears streaming down her red face, reaching for me with desperate little hands. I picked her up, feeling her tiny body shake with exhaustion and frustration. She'd been sleeping poorly for weeks, and I suspected she was picking up on the tension between Lyra and me. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, bouncing her gently. Through the thin walls I could hear our neighbors, the Kowalskis arguing about money, Mrs. Chen's television blaring some morning talk show, the college kids upstairs playing music that made our ceiling vibrate. Adding 2 more people to this chaos felt like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. When I returned to the kitchen, Lyra was eating her eggs while scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me with Emma in my arms, and for a moment, her expression softened. "She's getting her first tooth," Lyra said. "That's why she's been so fussy." I felt it yesterday when she was chewing on my finger. I sat down with Emma on my lap, trying to process everything. The baby grabbed at my coffee mug, and I moved it out of reach. Lyra, I need you to understand something. I work from home 3 days a week. I take calls from police dispatchers, fire departments, hospital IT systems. I need quiet. I need space. This apartment barely works for the three of us. Mason will be looking for work. He won't be here during the day, and Noah's in school. She set down her phone and looked at me directly. I know it's not ideal, but they're family. They're your family. Mason stopped being my family the day he decided to sleep with his secretary while married to my wife. The words hung in the air between us. Lyra's jaw tightened, and I could see her shifting into lawyer mode, the version of herself that emerged when she felt cornered or criticized. That's ancient history, Colby. We've all moved on. Mason made mistakes, but he's trying to do right by his son now. Noah barely knows his father, and this is a chance for them to build something. At our expense. At our inconvenience. There's a difference. Emma started fussing again, arching her back in that way she did when she was overstimulated. The morning light had grown harsh, and the sounds from neighboring apartments seemed to press in from all sides. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot. 3 stories down, I could see Henderson, our landlord, talking to someone by the dumpsters. The man was tall and thin, wearing a denim jacket I recognized. "Is that Mason down there?" I asked. Lyra joined me at the window, Emma between us. The man looked up at our building, and I got a clear view of his face. Mason Redden looked older than I remembered, his brown hair longer and unkempt, but it was definitely him. "He's early," Lyra said, and I heard something in her voice. Surprise, but also something else. Anticipation? "I told him tomorrow evening." As we watched, Mason pulled out his phone and made a call. Seconds later, Lyra's phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't move to answer it. "You should get that," I said. "It's probably your ex-husband wondering why we're watching him from the window like stalkers." She shot me a look but retrieved her phone. "Hello, Mason. Yes, I can see you. No, we said tomorrow. I understand, but—" She glanced at me, then walked into the bedroom for privacy. I remained at the window with Emma, watching Mason pace by his beat-up Honda Civic. He looked agitated, running his hands through his hair and gesturing as he talked. After a few minutes, Lyra returned. "There was an issue with his mother-in-law. She kicked them out early. He needs to bring Noah here today instead of tomorrow." "Today? As in right now?" "As in this afternoon. He's going to get Noah and their things, then come back around 3. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was barely 10 in the morning. In 5 hours, our tiny apartment would become home to 5 people, including a teenage boy I'd met exactly twice, and a man who'd caused my wife more pain than anyone should have to endure. "I need to think about this," I said. "There's nothing to think about. It's decided." Lyra's voice carried that finality she used when closing arguments in court. "I'm going to shower and clean up the living room. Can you watch Emma?" She disappeared into the bathroom before I could respond, leaving me alone with our daughter and a situation that felt increasingly out of control. Emma had finally settled, her tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, her breathing steady against my chest. This little girl was my world, my responsibility, my priority. Everything else, including my marriage, came second to her well-being. I walked back to the counter and read the lease addendum again, this time more carefully. The document was thorough, professionally written, clearly something Lyra had drafted herself. It specified the dates, the additional occupants, even details about shared utilities and household responsibilities. What it didn't specify was my consent. The shower started running, and I could hear Lyra humming, actually humming, like this was all perfectly normal. Like inviting your ex-husband to live with your new family was just another Tuesday. I thought about the past few months, the way she'd been working longer hours, taking more calls at home, being secretive about her phone. I'd attributed it to stress from her caseload, but now I wondered if there was more to it. Emma stirred in my arms, making the little cooing sounds that never failed to melt my heart. She looked like Lyra, the same green eyes, the same stubborn chin, but she had my darker coloring and what my mother insisted was my practical nature, whatever that meant. I made a decision then, standing in our cramped kitchen with my daughter in my arms, and my wife's unilateral choices scattered across the counter like evidence in a case I was just beginning to understand. I wasn't going to fight this. I wasn't going to argue or plead or try to change Lyra's mind. I was going to do something else entirely. I was going to take control. The water was still running when I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to my mother, then to my lawyer, then to a locksmith I'd found online with good reviews and same-day service. By the time Lyra emerged from the bathroom, towel drying her hair and looking refreshed, I had set several wheels in motion. "Feel better?" I asked, bouncing Emma gently. "Much. I'm going to run to the store and pick up some groceries. We'll need more food with Mason and Noah here. Can you start clearing space in the living room?" "Actually, I have a better idea," I said. "Why don't you go ahead and do your shopping? Take your time. I'll handle everything here." She looked at me suspiciously. "You're being awfully cooperative all of a sudden." "I've been thinking about what you said. About family and doing the right thing. Maybe you're correct. Maybe this is exactly what we all need." The suspicion in her eyes deepened, but she was running late for whatever schedule she'd set in her mind. "Okay, I'll be back in a couple of hours. Mason should be here around 3 with Noah." "Perfect timing," I said, and I meant it. After she left, I fed Emma and put her down for her morning nap. Then I got to work. The locksmith arrived first, a weathered man named Pete, who asked no questions and worked efficiently. While he installed new deadbolts on both the front door and the interior bedroom door, I made more calls. Henderson, our landlord, was surprisingly helpful once I explained the situation from my perspective. It turned out Lyra had been somewhat creative with the truth when she'd spoken to him. She'd mentioned temporary guests, but hadn't specified that one of them was her ex-husband, or that I hadn't consented to the arrangement. "That changes things," Henderson said over the phone. "The lease is in both your names. Both tenants have to agree to additional occupants. If you're not comfortable with this arrangement, I can serve them with a notice to vacate if they show up." "I'd appreciate that," I said, watching Pete work on the bedroom door. "And I'll need copies of any documentation my wife submitted." My next call was to my attorney, Janet Morrison, who specialized in family law. I'd consulted with her 6 months ago during a particularly rough patch in my marriage, though Lyra didn't know that. Janet was sharp, experienced, and had no patience for games. "Emergency custody?" she asked after I explained the situation. "That's a serious step, Colby. Are you sure you want to go nuclear?" My wife invited her ex-husband to live in our apartment without consulting me. She's prioritizing his needs over our daughter's stability. I think that demonstrates questionable judgment at minimum. "I'll need documentation. Everything you can get me. Text messages, the lease addendum, financial records showing any support she's been providing to the ex-husband. Can you get me all of that by Monday?" "I can get it to you today." After Pete finished with the locks, I spent an hour photographing everything: the lease addendum, text messages on Lyra's iPad that she'd left on the counter, bank statements showing several transfers to Mason over the past 2 months. I also set up a small security camera in the living room, positioned to capture the front door and most of the main living space. By the time I was finished, Emma was waking up from her nap. I changed her diaper, gave her a bottle, and packed a bag with everything we'd need for a few days: clothes, formula, diapers, her favorite stuffed elephant, the portable crib my mother had bought us for visits. At 2:30, I wrote a note and taped it to the inside of the front door. "Notice to unauthorized occupants. The undersigned tenant does not consent to additional occupants in this dwelling. Any attempt to enter or remain in these premises without written consent from all leaseholders constitutes trespassing. Legal action has been initiated. Contact Henderson Property Management with questions. Colby Varron, legal tenant. I took Emma and our bags, locked the new deadbolt, and headed to my car. As I was loading the car seat, I saw Mason's Honda turn into the parking lot. He had a teenage boy with him, Noah, presumably, and the back seat was packed with boxes and bags. I didn't wait to see his reaction to the locked door. I drove straight to my mother's house across town, where I knew Emma and I would be safe, comfortable, and completely unreachable by my wife and her questionable priorities. My phone started ringing before I'd even pulled into my mother's driveway. My mother, Darla Varron, had been waiting for this moment for months. Not specifically this moment. She couldn't have predicted the particular chaos of Mason and Noah and locked doors, but the general moment when her son would finally stand up to what she called that manipulative lawyer wife of yours. I knew she'd pull something like this eventually, Mom said, bouncing Emma on her knee while I unpacked our hastily assembled bags. A woman who puts her ex-husband before her own family isn't a woman worth keeping. It's complicated, Mom. Nothing complicated about it. She made her choice, now you're making yours. She looked down at Emma, who was giggling and grabbing at her grandmother's reading glasses. This little angel deserves better than being treated like an afterthought in her own home. My phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour. 17 missed calls from Lyra, 12 from a number I didn't recognize that was probably Mason, and several text messages that grew increasingly frantic as the afternoon wore on. The first few were relatively calm. Colby, what's going on? Mason says the door is locked and there's a note. This isn't funny. Open the door. Where are you? Where's Emma? Then they escalated. I'm calling the police. You can't lock us out of our own apartment. Henderson says you called him? What lies did you tell him? Mason and Noah have nowhere to go. How can you be so cruel? And finally, answer your phone right now or I'm filing an emergency motion first thing Monday morning. I turned the phone face down on Mom's kitchen table and tried to focus on feeding Emma her dinner. My daughter seemed happier here than she'd been at home in weeks. Mom's house was quiet, spacious, filled with the kind of calm that comes from decades of stable routine. No thin walls, no neighbors arguing, no tension crackling through every conversation. You should eat something, Mom said, setting a plate of her famous meatloaf in front of me. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. She wasn't wrong. Between work stress and baby duty and the constant underlying tension with Lyra, I'd been living on coffee and whatever leftovers I could grab between Emma's feeding schedule. The meatloaf smelled like childhood, like safety, like everything I wanted my daughter to have. I filed for emergency custody, I said, cutting a bite. Janet Morrison is handling it. We should have a hearing by Wednesday. Good. That girl needs to learn there are consequences to treating people like chess pieces. Mom settled into the chair across from me, her expression serious. But you know she's not going to take this lying down. Lyra's always been a fighter. That was an understatement. I'd watched Lyra demolish opposing counsel in court, seen her turn losing cases into victories through sheer force of will and superior preparation. She approached every conflict like a war to be won, and she usually won them. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Henderson. Colby, it's your landlord. I wanted to give you a heads up. Your wife showed up here about 20 minutes ago with some pretty serious accusations. What kind of accusations? She says you've abandoned the family, that you're holding the baby hostage, that I should force you to provide access to the apartment. She's got legal papers she says prove you're in violation of some court order. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of legal papers? I'm not a lawyer, but they look official. Something about emergency custody and temporary exclusive use of the marital residence. She wants me to let her and her guests into the apartment. Did you let them in? No, not yet. But if she's got a court order... Henderson, I need you to do me a favor. Don't let anyone into that apartment until you've verified any court documents with the courthouse directly. My wife is a lawyer. She knows how to make things look official even when they're not. There was a pause. You think she's lying? I think she's desperate, and desperate lawyers can be creative with the truth. After I hung up, I called Janet Morrison. She moved fast, Janet said after I explained the situation. But she made a mistake. You can't get a court order on Saturday afternoon unless it's a genuine emergency involving immediate danger to the child. If she's claiming she has legal papers, they're either fake or from some other case. So, what do I do? Nothing tonight. Let her play her hand. Monday morning, we file our emergency custody motion with all the documentation you provided. Meanwhile, I'll make some calls and see what she actually filed, if anything. And if Henderson lets her into the apartment, then she's in violation of your property rights as a co-tenant, and we add that to our filing. Either way, she's digging herself a deeper hole. I spent the evening playing with Emma, helping Mom with dinner dishes, and trying not to think about what Lyra might be doing. But around 9 o'clock, my phone rang with a number I recognized, my father-in-law, Robert Chen. Colby, what the heck is going on? Lyra called us in tears saying you've kidnapped Emma and left her homeless. I took a deep breath. Robert Chen was a reasonable man, a retired engineer who'd always treated me fairly despite his daughter's occasional dramatics. But he was also fiercely protective of Lyra, especially since her divorce from Mason had left her emotionally fragile. That's not what happened, Robert. Lyra invited Mason and his son to live in our apartment without discussing it with me. When I objected, she told me it was already decided, so I made some decisions of my own. She says you changed the locks and won't tell her where Emma is. Emma is safe, well cared for, and with her father. As for the locks, Lyra forfeited her right to make unilateral decisions about our living situation when she decided to move her ex-husband in without my consent. There was a long pause. Mason is living with you too? That was the plan. 11 days, according to the lease addendum she signed without telling me. Another pause, longer this time. Let me call you back, Robert said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Lyra's mother, Patricia. Colby, dear, I think there may have been some miscommunication here. Patricia Chen had always been more diplomatic than her husband, more willing to see multiple sides of any situation. She'd been a social worker before retiring, and she had a talent for diffusing family conflicts. I don't think there was any miscommunication, Patricia. Lyra was very clear about what she intended to do. Yes, but perhaps she didn't communicate it in the best way. You know how she gets when she thinks she's doing the right thing? She can be a bit forceful. Forceful is one word for it. The point is, she's very upset right now. She's staying at Mason's mother's house with him and Noah, and it's not a good situation. The woman has early-stage dementia and the house isn't suitable for a baby. I felt a flicker of guilt, but pushed it down. Then maybe Lyra should have thought about that before making housing decisions without consulting her husband. She's talking about filing for divorce, Colby. Is that really what you want? The question hung in the air. Was it what I wanted? 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. I loved Lyra, despite her flaws. I'd married her believing we could build something lasting together. But lately, it felt like I was married to someone who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to work with. What I want, I said carefully, is a wife who treats me like an equal partner in our marriage and puts our daughter's well-being above her need to rescue her ex-husband. And if she agrees to that, if she sends Mason and Noah somewhere else, then we can talk. But not until she demonstrates that she understands why this situation was unacceptable. After Patricia hung up, I sat in Mom's living room, watching Emma sleep in the portable crib. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Whatever happened between Lyra and me, this little girl deserved stability, security, and parents who put her needs first. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Mason. I don't know what your problem is, but you're hurting innocent people. Noah is confused and scared, and your wife is devastated. Be a man and fix this." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Your housing situation is not my responsibility. Your son's emotional well-being is not my responsibility. The only innocent person I'm concerned about is my daughter, who deserves a stable home environment. Find somewhere else to stay." His response came quickly. "Lyra told me what kind of man you really are. Now I see she was right." I almost asked what Lyra had told him about me, but decided I didn't want to know. Instead, I blocked the number and turned off my phone. Sunday morning brought a new development. Mom was making pancakes when someone knocked on her front door. Through the peephole, I could see a police officer standing on the porch. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez with the city police. We've had a report of a possible custodial interference situation involving a child." Mom looked at me, and I nodded. I'd been expecting this. "Officer, I'm Colby Varron. I assume this is about my daughter Emma?" "Yes, sir. We've had a complaint that you've taken the child without the mother's permission and are refusing to allow contact. The mother is my wife, and I have equal custodial rights. The child is safe, well cared for, and with her legal father. There's no custodial interference." The officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I need to verify that the child is safe and unharmed." I brought Emma to the door. She was freshly bathed, dressed in clean clothes, and happily chewing on a teething ring. The officer took one look at her and relaxed visibly. "She looks healthy and well cared for," he said. "But I do need to ask, is there a reason you're not allowing the mother to see her?" "The mother is welcome to see her daughter anytime she wants to have a reasonable conversation about our family's living situation. What she's not welcome to do is dictate terms and expect me to comply without question." The officer made some notes. "Sir, I have to advise you that if there are custody disputes, they need to be resolved through the family court system. Taking the child without agreement from both parents can complicate things legally." "I understand. We have a court hearing scheduled for Wednesday." After the officer left, I called Janet Morrison. "Good," she said. "The police report actually helps us. It shows that you were cooperative, that Emma is safe and well cared for, and that you're seeking legal resolution through proper channels. Meanwhile, it sounds like your wife is forum shopping, trying to get different authorities to give her the answer she wants. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, we file our emergency motion. I'll request temporary custody for you and exclusive use of the marital residence pending a full hearing. We'll argue that your wife's decision to invite her ex-husband to live in the family home without your consent demonstrates poor judgment and prioritizing her ex-husband's needs over the child's stability." "And you think we'll win?" "I think we have a strong case. But Lyra's a lawyer, and she knows the system. She'll fight back hard." Janet was right. Monday morning brought a flurry of legal activity. By 10 a.m., I'd been served with papers for 3 different motions: emergency custody in Lyra's favor, exclusive use of the apartment, and an order requiring me to return Emma immediately. But Janet had been busy too. By noon, we'd filed our counter-motions, complete with photographs of the lease addendum, bank records showing Lyra's financial support of Mason, and a detailed timeline of events. We also included character references from my employer, my mother, and Emma's pediatrician. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning. Until then, Emma and I were staying put at Mom's house, and Lyra was apparently still at Mason's mother's place, growing more desperate by the hour. Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Lyra, and for the first time since this started, her voice sounded small and defeated. "Colby, can we talk? Please? Just the two of us?" "I'm listening." "I made a mistake. I can see that now. I should have discussed the Mason situation with you before making any decisions." "Yes, you should have. I was just... Noah reminded me so much of myself at that age, caught between parents who couldn't get along, feeling like everything was his fault. I wanted to help. At our daughter's expense." I didn't see it that way at the time, but I understand now. Emma has to come first. Our family has to come first. I felt myself softening slightly. This was the Lyra I'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, caring, willing to admit when she was wrong. Where are Mason and Noah now? Mason found a place. A friend of his has a couch they can use until he gets back on his feet. They moved out of his mother's house this morning. And what about us? I want to come home, Colby. I want us to be a family again. Can you forgive me? I looked across Mom's living room, where Emma was playing happily on a blanket, surrounded by toys. She seemed more content here than she'd been at home in months. The apartment had always felt cramped and stressful, but I'd assumed that was just new parent adjustment. Now I wondered if it was something more. I need some time to think, I said. Let's see what happens at the hearing tomorrow. The hearing? Colby, if I'm admitting I was wrong, can't we just call off the lawyers and work this out ourselves? The lawyers stay until we have a formal agreement about custody and living arrangements. I'm not going through this again. There was a long pause. You don't trust me. Right now? No, I don't. The line went quiet, and I thought she might have hung up. But then she spoke again, and her voice had changed. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by something harder. I hope you know what you're doing, Colby. Because once we walk into that courtroom tomorrow, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything already changed, I said. The moment you signed that addendum without talking to me. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of Mom's living room, listening to Emma babble to herself as she played. Tomorrow would determine the course of our lives, mine, hers, and Lyra's. I'd started this as a way to get my wife's attention, to force her to see how unreasonable her decisions had been. Now I was beginning to think it might end our marriage entirely, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't sure that would be a bad thing. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything feel ominous and uncertain. I dressed carefully in my best suit, navy blue, conservative tie, the outfit I'd worn to our wedding 3 years ago. Janet Morrison had been clear about the importance of appearances in family court. Judges make decisions based on facts, she'd said during our prep session Tuesday evening, but they're human beings. They notice who looks stable, responsible, put together. They notice who looks like the better parent. Emma seemed to sense the tension. She'd been fussy since dawn, refusing her bottle and crying whenever I tried to put her down. Mom finally took over, walking her around the kitchen while I reviewed my notes one last time. She knows, Mom said, bouncing Emma gently. Babies always know when something important is happening. The courthouse was the imposing brick building downtown, all marble floors and echoing hallways that made every footstep sound significant. I met Janet in the lobby, and she looked me over with approval. Good. You look like a responsible father and husband. Now remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. Answer truthfully but briefly. Don't volunteer information, and whatever you do, don't let Lyra provoke you into losing your temper. We made our way to Family Court Division 3, where Judge Patricia Hawkins presided over custody disputes, divorce proceedings, and domestic relations cases. Janet had warned me that Judge Hawkins was known for her no-nonsense approach and her intolerance for parents who put their own needs ahead of their children's welfare. Lyra was already there when we arrived, sitting at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, Michael Brennan. Brennan was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious family law firms, expensive and aggressive. Lyra looked professional in a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her briefcase handle. She looked up when I entered, and our eyes met across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw something vulnerable in her expression, regret, maybe, or fear. But it was gone quickly replaced by the mask of professional competence she wore like armor. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hawkins presiding. Judge Hawkins was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She reviewed the files in front of her for several minutes before speaking. "This is an emergency hearing in the matter of Varron versus Varron, case number FL 2023-4472. We're here to address competing motions for emergency custody of the minor child Emma Rose Varron, age 8 months. Counselor Morrison, you filed first. Please proceed." Janet stood and approached the podium with confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client, Colby Varron, seeks emergency custody of his daughter based on his wife's demonstrated pattern of poor judgment and prioritizing the needs of her former husband over the welfare of their child." She laid out the facts methodically. The lease addendum signed without my consent, the financial support Lyra had been providing to Mason, the plan to house 5 people in a 600-square-foot apartment with an infant. Your Honor, the respondent made a unilateral decision to invite her ex-husband and his teenage son to live in the family home without consulting the child's father. When Mr. Varron objected, she informed him that the decision was final and non-negotiable. This demonstrates a troubling pattern of prioritizing her former husband's needs over her current family's stability. Judge Hawkins made notes as Janet spoke. "What is the current living situation of the child?" "The child is residing with Mr. Varron at his mother's home, where she has her own room, a stable environment, and proper care. Mrs. Varron, meanwhile, has been staying at various locations with her ex-husband and his son." "Objection," Brennan said, rising. "That mischaracterizes the situation entirely." "This is a hearing, not a trial," Judge Hawkins said dryly. "Save your objections for cross-examination. Continue, Counselor Morrison." Janet presented the evidence systematically. Photographs of the lease addendum, bank records showing transfers to Mason, text messages between Lyra and Mason discussing their living arrangements. She painted a picture of a woman who had lost perspective, who was more concerned with rescuing her ex-husband than protecting her daughter. When Janet finished, Brennan stood for his presentation. He was smooth, polished, the kind of lawyer who could—
"You cheated on me! You betrayed me! You destroyed our family!"
Yes, I cheated! And you're the one to blame! You were never there for me! We're divorcing!
"You get nothing! The house is mine! The money is mine! You'll live on the street!" What?
Want to know who I cheated with? Your boss! He's a real man!
You're finished! I'll make sure you get nothing! You hear me? Nothing!
I don't need your money. I'm leaving you for him. He's twice the man you are. And you know what else?
make black sound white if it served his client's interests. Your Honor, what we have here is a vindictive husband who has weaponized his child to punish his wife for showing compassion to a family in crisis. Mrs. Varron, motivated by concern for her ex-stepson, a child she helped raise for 2 years, offered temporary assistance to prevent a minor from becoming homeless. Brennan's version of events cast Lyra as a selfless stepmother and me as a controlling husband who couldn't tolerate his wife's charitable impulses. He glossed over the lack of consultation, the cramped living conditions, the financial support she'd been providing without my knowledge. Mr. Varron's response was immediate and extreme. Brennan continued. He changed the locks, took the child, and disappeared without providing any way for the mother to contact her daughter. This is exactly the kind of alienating behavior that family courts exist to prevent. Judge Hawkins listened impassively, making occasional notes. When Brennan finished, she looked up. I'd like to hear from both parties directly. Mrs. Varron, please approach. Lyra stood and walked to the witness stand with the confidence of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. Her heels struck the polished floor in a steady rhythm, each step measured, deliberate, as if she were entering familiar territory rather than being scrutinized under oath. She didn't glance in my direction, didn't acknowledge the quiet weight of the room turning toward her. When she raised her hand to be sworn in, there was no tremor, only the practiced calm of someone used to answering difficult questions in public. She settled into the chair, her back straight, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly in her lap, her voice clear. "Mrs. Varron," Judge Hawkins began, "explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to invite additional occupants into your home without consulting your husband." "Your Honor, I was concerned about Noah, my ex-stepson. He's 15 years old, and he was about to become homeless through no fault of his own. I felt I had a moral obligation to help." Her tone was earnest, carefully controlled, and she met the judge's gaze directly, as if willing the sincerity of her conviction to carry the answer. "And you didn't think your husband might have an opinion about this decision?" Lyra hesitated for just a moment, the briefest pause where her eyes flicked downward before lifting again. I knew Colby would object. He's never been comfortable with my relationship with Noah, but I felt this was an emergency situation that required immediate action. "How long were you planning for these additional occupants to stay?" 11 days, just until Mason could find permanent housing. "And during those 11 days, where exactly were 5 people going to sleep in your 600-square-foot apartment?" Another hesitation, longer this time. Her fingers tightened together, knuckles paling. "We would have managed. Families make sacrifices for each other." Judge Hawkins made a note, the soft scratch of pen against paper unnervingly loud. "Mrs. Varron, I'm looking at bank records showing several transfers to Mason Redden over the past 2 months. Can you explain these?" "Mason was going through a difficult time financially. I helped him with rent and utilities so that Noah would have a stable place to live." "How much money did you provide?" "Approximately $3,000. "Did you discuss these expenditures with your husband?" The longest hesitation yet. Lyra swallowed. "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" "Because I knew he would object, and I felt it was the right thing to do." Judge Hawkins leaned forward slightly, her expression sharpening. "Mrs. Varron, you seem to have a pattern of making significant decisions affecting your family without consulting your husband because you know he'll object. Do you see how this might be problematic in a marriage?" Yes, Your Honor. I can see how it might appear that way." "Mr. Varron, please approach." I stood on slightly unsteady legs and made my way to the witness stand. The courtroom felt enormous, cavernous in a way it hadn't when I was seated, and every step toward the front seemed louder than it should have been. I could feel Lyra's eyes on me as I was sworn in, her gaze a physical weight between my shoulder blades. "Mr. Varron," Judge Hawkins said, "tell me about your concerns regarding this living arrangement." I took a deep breath and tried to channel the calm confidence Janet had coached me to project. The words felt rehearsed, but necessary, an anchor in a moment where emotion threatened to take over. "Your Honor, my primary concern is my daughter's welfare. Our apartment is extremely small with thin walls and close quarters. Emma is 8 months old and still waking up frequently at night. Adding 2 more people to that environment would have been chaotic and stressful for everyone, especially an infant who needs stability and routine." "What was your reaction when you learned about your wife's decision?" "I was shocked, Your Honor, not just by the decision itself, but by the fact that she'd made it without any discussion. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. Major decisions that affect the family should be made together." "And your response was to change the locks and take the child?" "My response was to prioritize my daughter's well-being and seek legal resolution through proper channels. I didn't abandon anyone or leave anyone homeless. I simply refused to allow our home to become overcrowded with people who had no legal right to be there." Judge Hawkins nodded slowly. "Mr. Varron, do you have any objection to your wife having a relationship with her ex-stepson?" None at all, Your Honor. But that relationship shouldn't come at the expense of our daughter's stability or our marriage's foundation of mutual respect and consultation. After I stepped down, both attorneys made brief closing arguments. Janet's voice was steady and precise as she emphasized the pattern of unilateral decision-making and the priority of Emma's welfare. Brennan spoke with polished indignation, painting me as controlling and vindictive, his words sharp but impersonal, as if this were all an abstract exercise. Judge Hawkins reviewed her notes for several minutes before speaking. The silence stretched, oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of paper and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. This is a difficult case because both parents clearly love their child and want what's best for her. However, I'm troubled by several aspects of Mrs. Varron's behavior. My heart started beating faster. First, the decision to invite additional occupants into the family home without spousal consultation shows poor judgment and a concerning disregard for her husband's rights as both a spouse and a co-tenant. Second, the financial support provided to the ex-husband without disclosure suggests a pattern of deception that undermines the marriage's foundation of trust and communication. Third, the plan to house 5 people, including an infant, in a 600-square-foot apartment demonstrates a lack of consideration for the child's developmental needs. I could see Lyra's face growing pale, the color draining as each point landed. However, I'm also concerned about Mr. Varron's response, which was immediate and extreme. Changing locks and removing the child without providing any communication mechanism is not the behavior I expect from a parent seeking to protect his child's best interests. My stomach sank, a cold heaviness settling there. Therefore, I'm granting joint temporary custody with the following conditions. Emma will remain in Mr. Varron's care at his mother's residence during weekdays, providing stability and appropriate living space. Mrs. Varron will have supervised visitation on weekends, with supervision provided by Mr. Varron's mother or another agreed-upon party. Additionally, I'm ordering both parties to attend family counseling before any changes to custody arrangements will be considered. Mrs. Varron, you will not invite additional occupants into any residence where Emma is present without written consent from Mr. Varron. Finally, I'm scheduling a full custody hearing for 6 weeks from today. Both parties will have time to demonstrate their commitment to co-parenting and putting Emma's needs first. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Lyra approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom, her movements tight, contained. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "You got what you wanted." "What I wanted was a wife who treated me like a partner instead of an obstacle. And what you got was a custody battle and a broken marriage. I got a daughter who's safe and stable, which is more than she would have had in our apartment with your ex-husband." Lyra's composure finally cracked, her expression twisting with anger and hurt. "You don't understand anything, do you? Noah needed help. He needed family. But you were so threatened by Mason that you couldn't see past your own insecurity. This was never about Mason. This was about you making major decisions without consulting me. This was about you prioritizing everyone else's needs over our families." "Our family?" She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "What family? You've destroyed that." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Brennan followed, already talking on his phone, probably planning their next move. Janet put a hand on my shoulder. "You did well in there." Judge Hawkins saw through the emotional manipulation and focused on what's best for Emma. "So what happens now?" "Now you go home, take care of your daughter, and prepare for the long haul. This isn't over. Lyra's going to fight for full custody, and she's got the resources to make it expensive and ugly. But we won today. We won the battle. The war is just getting started." As I drove back to Mom's house, I thought about Lyra's parting words. Had I destroyed our family? Or had I simply refused to let her destroy it in a different way? Emma was napping when I arrived, and Mom was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She looked up expectantly as I entered. Well? Temporary custody. Emma stays with us during the week. Lyra gets supervised weekend visits. Mom nodded approvingly. That judge has sense. Now what? Now we wait for the next hearing and hope Lyra comes to her senses. But even as I said it, I knew that was unlikely. The Lyra I'd seen in that courtroom wasn't the woman I'd married. She was harder, more calculating, more willing to fight dirty to get what she wanted. And if she wanted a war, I was beginning to think I might be ready to give her one. The next 3 weeks fell into a tense routine. Emma and I lived at Mom's house during the week, where she thrived in the quiet, spacious environment. Weekends brought Lyra's supervised visits, which took place in Mom's living room under watchful eyes that missed nothing. Lyra arrived each Saturday morning precisely at 9, dressed professionally even for casual visits with her daughter. She brought toys, books, expensive outfits that Emma would outgrow in a month. But there was something performative about it all, as if she were playing the role of devoted mother for an audience. "She's getting bigger," Lyra said during her 3rd visit, holding Emma up to examine her face. "I think she looks more like you now." "She's teething," I replied from my position in the kitchen doorway, close enough to supervise but far enough to give them space. "That's why she's been fussy." "I know about the teething, Colby. I am her mother." The emphasis on am wasn't lost on me. Lyra was fighting to maintain her maternal authority even in this reduced role. She'd arrive with detailed questions about Emma's eating schedule, her sleep patterns, her developmental milestones. She took notes in a small leather journal, documenting everything like evidence for the upcoming custody hearing. But it was the phone calls that revealed her true strategy. I started getting them on Monday of the 4th week. First from Emma's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Martinez, asking about concerns that had been brought to her attention. "What kind of concerns?" I asked. "Well, your wife called and mentioned that Emma has been in your sole care for several weeks. She wanted to make sure there weren't any medical issues I should be aware of." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that Emma appears healthy and well cared for based on her last visit. But Mr. Varron, if there are custody issues, I need to be clear about who has authorization to make medical decisions." The next call came from Emma's daycare center, where she'd been enrolled but hadn't attended since this whole situation started. "Mr. Varron, this is Jennifer at Little Stars Daycare. We had your wife stop by asking about Emma's enrollment status. She seemed to think there might be some confusion about who has authority to make decisions about her care." "There's no confusion. The court order is clear. Could you fax us a copy? We want to make sure we're following proper procedures." By Thursday, I'd received similar calls from our family insurance company, the local library where Lyra had signed Emma up for baby story time, and even the grocery store where we had a family account. "She's building a narrative," Janet Morrison explained when I called her. "She's documenting every interaction, every decision you make, looking for something she can use to argue that you're not the better custodial parent." "Is that legal?" "Unfortunately, yes. And it's smart, if unethical. She's creating a paper trail that suggests you're isolated Emma from her mother and disrupted her normal routines." "But the judge ordered supervised visitation, which Lyra is complying with while simultaneously building a case that the arrangement is harmful to Emma's well-being. You need to be very careful, Colby. Document everything, keep detailed records, and don't give her any ammunition." That weekend's visit felt different from the start. Lyra arrived with Mason. "He's waiting in the car," she said when she saw my expression. "I just wanted you to know he was here. Noah misses Emma, and Mason thought it might be good for him to see that she's okay." Through the front window, I could see Mason's Honda parked at the curb. Noah was in the passenger seat, staring at the house with an expression I couldn't read. "The court order specifies supervised visitation between you and Emma," I said. "It doesn't include Mason or Noah. They're not coming inside. I just thought Emma is part of Noah's family, too. He helped take care of her when she was first born." That was true, technically. During the first few weeks after Emma's birth, when Lyra was recovering and I was overwhelmed with new parent exhaustion, Noah had been helpful during his weekend visits. He'd been gentle with the baby, eager to help with bottles and diaper changes. But that felt like a lifetime ago. Maybe when this is all settled, I said. But not now. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She went back to the car briefly, and I saw her talking to Mason and Noah through the window. When she returned, her expression was carefully neutral. The visit itself was strained. Emma seemed to pick up on the tension, fussing more than usual and clinging to me when Lyra tried to hold her. After 2 hours, Lyra gave up trying to engage and spent most of the remaining time taking photos with her phone. "For my records," she said when she noticed me watching, "I want to document my time with her." After they left, Mom shook her head grimly. That woman is up to something. The way she was taking pictures, asking questions about Emma's routine. She's not here to visit. She's here to investigate. Monday brought confirmation of Mom's suspicions. I was working from home, handling a routine system update for the police department's dispatch software, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Varron, this is Amanda Foster from Child Protective Services. We've received a report concerning your daughter Emma, and I need to schedule a home visit." "What kind of report?" "I can't discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you it concerns allegations of neglect and inappropriate living conditions. When would be a good time for me to come by?" "This is ridiculous. My daughter is perfectly well cared for." "I'm sure she is, Mr. Varron. This is just a routine investigation. We're required to follow up on all reports involving minor children." We scheduled the visit for Wednesday afternoon. After I hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, my hands shaking with rage. Lyra had called CPS. She'd reported me for child neglect. I called Janet immediately. "This is escalation," she said after I explained the situation. "She's trying to create evidence that Emma is at risk in your care. But it's completely false. Emma is healthy, happy, well cared for." Which the CPS worker will see immediately. But the report itself becomes part of the record. In the custody hearing, Lyra can point to it as evidence that she had legitimate concerns about Emma's welfare. So what do I do? Cooperate fully. Make sure the house is clean, Emma is well-dressed and happy, and you have documentation of her medical care, feeding schedule, everything. Turn this into a positive for our case by showing how well cared for Emma is. The CPS visit went exactly as Janet predicted. Amanda Foster was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen enough real neglect cases to recognize a false report when she saw one. She spent 20 minutes looking around Mom's house, playing with Emma, and reviewing the documentation I'd prepared. "Mr. Varron, your daughter appears healthy and well cared for. The home environment is appropriate and stable. I'll be closing this case with no further action required. Can you tell me who made the report?" "I can't provide specific details, but I can tell you it came from someone claiming to be concerned about the child's welfare during a custody dispute." She gave me a meaningful look. "We see this sometimes in contentious divorce cases. People use our system to try to gain advantage in family court." "And that's legal?" "Making a false report is illegal, but proving intent to deceive is difficult unless the allegations are completely fabricated. In this case, the caller expressed genuine-sounding concerns about a child being removed from her normal environment and cared for by extended family. After she left, I called Janet again. "Good," she said when I reported the outcome. "Now we have documentation that CPS found Emma well cared for in your custody. That actually strengthens our position. But Lyra gets to keep escalating with false accusations? Until she goes too far and damages her own credibility, which, knowing Lyra, she probably will." Janet was right. The following week brought a new level of harassment. I started getting calls at work from people claiming to be concerned about Emma's welfare. A woman who said she was a neighbor reported seeing me yelling at the baby in the yard. A man claimed he'd witnessed me roughly handling Emma at the grocery store. None of it was true, but each report required follow-up calls, explanations, documentation. My supervisor at work pulled me aside to ask about the personal issues that seemed to be affecting my professional life. "I'm going through a custody dispute," I explained. "My ex-wife is trying to create problems for me at work. Is there anything we need to be concerned about? Any issues with your security clearance or reliability?" "No. These are false allegations related to the divorce. I can provide documentation if you need it." But the damage was being done. Colleagues were looking at me differently, wondering why I was getting so many personal calls during work hours. The stress was affecting my sleep, my concentration, my ability to be the kind of father Emma deserved. It all came to a head on a Thursday evening. I was giving Emma her bath when someone knocked on Mom's front door. Through the peephole, I could see 2 police officers. "Mr. Varron, we've had a report of a domestic disturbance at this address." "There's no domestic disturbance. I'm here alone with my daughter." "Sir, we need to verify that everyone in the house is safe. Can you step outside?" I wrapped Emma in a towel and opened the door. "Officers, this is my mother's house. I'm staying here temporarily during a custody dispute. There's no disturbance, domestic or otherwise." One of the officers, a young woman who looked barely out of the academy, consulted her notes. "We received a call about shouting and what sounded like someone in distress. The only shouting you might have heard was my 8-month-old daughter protesting her bath time." Mom appeared behind me, still wearing her apron from dinner preparation. "Officers, what's this about?" "Ma'am, we're following up on a disturbance call. The only disturbance here is my granddaughter's bedtime routine. She's teething and cranky, but that's hardly a police matter." The officers looked around the quiet, well-maintained house, at me holding a clean, healthy baby, at my elderly mother in her apron. The situation was clearly not what they'd been led to expect. "Sir, do you have any idea who might have called this in?" I had a very good idea, but I couldn't prove it. "I'm going through a contentious custody dispute. There have been several false reports made recently." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll note in our report that no disturbance was found and all occupants appear safe and well." After they left, I sat in Mom's kitchen, Emma finally asleep in her carrier, and tried to process what was happening. Lyra wasn't just fighting for custody anymore. She was trying to destroy my reputation, my job, my ability to function as a parent. "She's lost her mind," Mom said, pouring herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "That girl has completely lost her mind." "She's desperate," I corrected, "and desperate people do desperate things." But even as I said it, I realized that Lyra's desperation was making her dangerous. She was a lawyer with resources, connections, and a willingness to use any weapon available. I was a tech support worker, living with his mother, trying to protect his daughter from a woman who was supposed to love them both. For the first time since this whole mess started, I began to wonder if I was in over my head. That night, after Emma was asleep and Mom had gone to bed, I sat in the dark living room and made a decision. If Lyra wanted to escalate this conflict, if she wanted to fight dirty and use false accusations and harassment, then I would give her exactly what she was asking for. But I wouldn't be playing defense anymore. It was time to go on the attack. I started my research the next morning, using skills I'd developed during my years in IT support. When you troubleshoot systems for police departments and emergency services, you learn how to dig deep into databases, cross-reference information, and find connections that others miss. Lyra had made one crucial mistake in her escalation campaign. She'd left a digital trail. The false CPS report had been called in from her cell phone. The fake domestic disturbance complaint had been made from Mason's number. The concerned neighbor reports all came from numbers registered to addresses within a 3-block radius of Mason's mother's house, where Lyra had been staying. But more interesting was what I found when I cross-referenced Mason's financial records, information that was publicly available due to his previous bankruptcy filing. In the past 2 months, he'd received not just the $3,000 from Lyra that had been disclosed in court, but an additional $4,000 through a series of smaller transfers designed to avoid detection. $7,000. Lyra had given her ex-husband $7,000 while telling the court she'd only provided $3,000 in emergency assistance. Even more damaging was the timing of the transfers. The largest payment, $1,500, had been made the day after our custody hearing, with a memo line that read, "Legal consultation." Lyra had paid Mason to help her build a case against me. I called Janet Morrison with my findings. "This is good," she said, after reviewing the documentation I'd compiled. "This is very good. She's committed perjury by lying about the amount of financial support she provided, and she's engaged in witness tampering by paying Mason to participate in her harassment campaign. Is it enough to change the custody arrangement? It's enough to request an emergency hearing and ask the judge to reconsider the entire case. But Colby, you need to be prepared for nuclear war. When we present this evidence, Lyra is going to come at you with everything she has. She's already doing that. No, she's not. Right now, she's trying to build a case through false reports and harassment. When she realizes that strategy has failed, she's going to get creative. And creative lawyers can be dangerous. Janet was right to warn me. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and Lyra's response was swift and vicious. On Monday, I received a call from my employer's Human Resources Department. "Mr. Varron, we need to discuss some allegations that have been brought to our attention regarding your conduct." "What kind of allegations?" "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come in this afternoon?" The meeting was a nightmare. Sitting across from HR Director Patricia Williams and my supervisor Tom Chen, I listened as they outlined a series of complaints that had been filed against me. "We've received reports that you've been accessing confidential databases for personal use," Patricia said, consulting a file folder. "Specifically that you've been using your system access to investigate individuals involved in your custody dispute." "That's completely false. I've never used work systems for personal research." "We've also received a complaint that you've been making threatening phone calls to your ex-wife from work phones." "I don't have an ex-wife. I'm separated from my current wife, and I've never made threatening calls to anyone." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Colby, you know I've always supported you, but these allegations are serious. If you've been misusing your access privileges..." "I haven't been. I can prove it. Every system access is logged and time-stamped. You can review my activity logs for the past month and see that I've never accessed anything outside my normal work responsibilities." Patricia made notes. "We'll be conducting a full investigation. In the meantime, your system access is suspended pending resolution of these allegations." "You're suspending me?" "You're being placed on administrative leave with pay while we investigate. If the allegations prove unfounded, you'll be reinstated with full privileges." I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Lyra had managed to attack my livelihood, my professional reputation, everything I'd worked to build over the past 5 years. But she'd also made another mistake. The complaints filed against me had been submitted by someone claiming to be a concerned citizen who had observed my alleged misconduct. But the level of detail in the complaints, specific references to database names, system access procedures, internal company policies, could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of my job responsibilities. Knowledge that Lyra had gained during our marriage, when I'd occasionally discussed work challenges and system updates over dinner. She'd overplayed her hand. Tuesday brought another escalation. I was at home with Emma when Mom answered the phone in the kitchen. "Colby," she called, her voice tight with concern. "It's your father-in-law. He wants to talk to you." Robert Chen sounded tired and frustrated when I took the call. "Colby, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay." "Did you threaten Lyra? Did you tell her you would make sure she never saw Emma again?" "Absolutely not. Robert, I've never threatened Lyra or anyone else. Because she called us last night crying, saying you'd left her a voicemail saying you were going to disappear with Emma and she'd never find you." I felt the familiar surge of rage that had become my constant companion. Robert, I haven't called Lyra in 2 weeks. I haven't left her any voicemails. This is another false accusation. Can you prove that? Yes, I can. My phone records will show every call I've made. I can also provide recordings of any voicemails I've left, because I haven't left any. There was a long pause. Colby, I want to believe you. But Lyra is my daughter, and she's scared. She says you've become someone she doesn't recognize. Your daughter has been filing false police reports, making fake CPS complaints, and trying to get me fired from my job. She's the one who's become someone I don't recognize. That doesn't sound like Lyra. It didn't sound like Lyra when she decided to move her ex-husband into our apartment without telling me either. But she did it. After Robert hung up, I sat in Mom's kitchen and tried to piece together Lyra's strategy. She was systematically attacking every aspect of my life: my job, my reputation, my relationship with her family, my ability to parent Emma. She was creating a narrative of an unstable, threatening ex-husband who couldn't be trusted with custody of his daughter. And she was doing it all while maintaining plausible deniability. The phone calls came from different numbers. The reports were filed by anonymous concerned citizens. The complaints were submitted by people who couldn't be directly traced back to her. But I had something she didn't know about: the security camera I'd installed in Mom's living room. The camera was small, discreet, positioned to capture the area where Lyra's supervised visits took place. I'd installed it partly for security, but mostly to document my compliance with the court's visitation orders. Every visit was recorded, time-stamped, and stored on a secure server. Including last Saturday's visit, when Lyra had spent 20 minutes on her phone in Mom's bathroom, thinking she was out of audio range. The camera's sensitive microphone had picked up her side of several conversations where she discussed the next phase of her strategy, conversations where she coordinated with Mason about maintaining pressure, conversations where she spoke to someone about making sure the harassment looks random and unconnected. Most damning of all was a conversation where she'd spoken to someone about the threatening voicemail she was planning to report to her parents and the police, a voicemail she was going to create herself. Wednesday morning's emergency hearing was packed. Judge Hawkins had clearly been briefed on the escalating conflict, and her expression was stern as she called the court to order. This case has generated an unusual amount of activity in the past 3 weeks, she began. I've reviewed reports of CPS investigations, police calls, workplace complaints, and various allegations from both parties. I'm hoping today's hearing will clarify what's actually happening here. Janet stood and approached the podium with a thick folder of documentation. Your Honor, what's happening here is a systematic campaign of harassment and perjury designed to manipulate the court's custody decision. She laid out the evidence methodically. The financial records showing Lyra's undisclosed payments to Mason, the phone records linking the false reports to Lyra and Mason's numbers, the audio recordings of Lyra coordinating her harassment campaign. Most significantly, Your Honor, we have clear evidence that Mrs. Varron committed perjury in her previous testimony by understating the financial support she provided to her ex-husband by more than 50%. Judge Hawkins reviewed the bank records with increasing displeasure. Mrs. Varron, you testified that you provided approximately $3,000 to Mr. Redden. These records show payments totaling $7,000. Lyra looked pale but maintained her composure. Your Honor, I may have underestimated the total amount. The payments were made over several weeks, and I didn't calculate the precise total before testifying. You didn't calculate the total before testifying about financial support in a custody hearing? No, Your Honor. I should have been more precise. Janet continued her presentation, playing selected audio clips from the security camera recordings. The court listened as Lyra's voice discussed coordinating false reports, timing harassment calls, and creating fake evidence. Your Honor, Janet concluded, Mrs. Varron has engaged in perjury witness tampering, filing false police reports, and systematic harassment of my client. This behavior demonstrates not only poor judgment, but active malice toward the father of her child. Brennan's response was desperate and unfocused. He argued that the recordings were obtained without consent, that the financial discrepancy was an honest mistake, that his client was simply a concerned mother trying to protect her daughter. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Hawkins' patience was clearly exhausted. "Mrs. Varron," she said after both attorneys had finished, "I am deeply troubled by what I've heard today. You have lied to this court about financial matters, engaged in systematic harassment of your ex-husband, and filed false reports with multiple agencies. Your Honor, I was only trying to... You were trying to manipulate the legal system to gain advantage in a custody dispute. This behavior is not only unethical, it's potentially criminal." Judge Hawkins reviewed her notes for several minutes before continuing. "I am modifying my previous custody order effective immediately. Mr. Varron is granted full physical and legal custody of Emma Rose Varron. Mrs. Varron's visitation is reduced to supervised visits every other weekend, with supervision provided by a court-appointed monitor. Additionally, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential perjury and false reporting charges. I am also referring Mrs. Varron to the State Bar Association for investigation of ethical violations. Finally, Mrs. Varron is ordered to cease all contact with Mr. Varron except through attorneys or the court-appointed monitor. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, I looked across the courtroom at Lyra. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the judge's bench with an expression of complete shock. Brennan was whispering urgently in her ear, but she didn't seem to be hearing him. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. This was the woman I'd married, the mother of my daughter, the person I'd once planned to spend my life with. She'd destroyed herself trying to destroy me, and now we were both casualties of a war that never should have been fought. But then I thought about Emma, safe and happy at Mom's house, and the pity faded. I'd done what I had to do to protect my daughter. Everything else was just collateral damage. Outside the courthouse, Janet shook my hand with satisfaction. "It's over, Colby. You won." "Did I?" I asked, looking back at the imposing brick building where my marriage had officially ended. "Because it doesn't feel like winning. You got your daughter. You got your life back. You got justice. What more do you want?" I thought about that question as I drove back to Mom's house, back to Emma, back to the life I was building from the wreckage of my marriage. What more did I want? Maybe just the chance to forget that any of this had ever happened. But as I pulled into Mom's driveway and saw Emma's face pressed against the window, grinning at the sight of my car, I realized that forgetting wasn't the point. The point was moving forward, and for the first time in months, I finally could.